it was very cool working with Salesforce that way and showing off our product on the Force platform. And I've always been really interested in Salesforce since then and how neat it was for developers to be able to build on the platform.
That is Sue Berry, a Senior Director of Product Management here at Salesforce. I'm Josh Burke, your host of the Salesforce Developer Podcast. And here on the podcast, you'll hear stories and insights from developers for developers. Today, we sit down and talk with Sue about some of the new stuff coming out with mobile development, but we start, as we frequently do, with her early years.
You know, initially when I started out, I thought I was going to be a cardiologist, but then thinking about all the years of going through school, and when I was at University of Florida, someone got me onto computers, and I thought, hey, this is cool. I really want to do this. So I switched directions, and here I am now.
Interesting. So, what's your earliest experience with a computer? Were you interested in them before, or did you just kind of get hooked in college?
Well, I loved playing the video games, and then you had all the Atari games, and then you had PC games come out, and then Windows became a big thing, and so after that, I was just hooked, and I wanted to go down that route.
That's awesome. Then, how did you get involved with Salesforce technology?
Yeah, with Salesforce, my first introduction to Salesforce was when I was working at a different company. We actually built an agile product on top of the Force platform. And it was very cool working with Salesforce that way and showing off our product on the Force platform. And I've always been really interested in Salesforce since then and how neat it was for developers to be able to build on the platform. And, that's what got me into Salesforce.
Gotcha. And then how did you join the mothership?
I was looking for a change, and I saw a Salesforce opportunity for mobile, which I was already working on. And I thought, hey, it's a little bit out of my, window as far as how far I want to go. But I went, and I loved the people. When I talked to the employees that were working there, they talked about how awesome Salesforce was and how the people that they work with were great, and how Salesforce treats you like a valued employee. And I was like, hey, I want to work for this company, and I've been here for 2 years now.
That's awesome. Now, I like to ask this question to all the product managers I get on the show because I almost always get somewhat different answers, sometimes wildly different answers. As a product manager at Salesforce, how would you describe your job?
That's a very good question. One thing I love about product management in general is that you get to wear all of these different hats. At Salesforce, that's no different. I can be really deep down into the backlog talking about requirements, in one moment. And then on the next call, I'm talking about how do we evangelize what we're doing and what kind of marketing can we do? Or I'm talking to customers about their problems and how we can solve it. So I love that I can wear so many different hats, and I can be the champion of, the mobile SDK or, the mobile tooling that we're providing, or I can take feedback from customers and say, hey, our customers really need this feature. We need to develop this, and how quickly can we get it done? And it's just great to be able to interact with on the developer side, on the customer side, and on the marketing side.
Nice. Now, how does mobile, like Salesforce, we've got 3-release cycle, that drives a lot of the stuff with core. How impacted is the mobile development, like the SDK development from that? Or are you kind of on your own sort of thread when you're coming up with new features and roadmap?
Yeah, for a lot of the mobile stuff that I work with, we're on our own. We're outside of core. And the nice thing about that is that we get to set our own releases. And we often, tie, especially for mobile SDK, we have one release that's tied to the new, iOS and Android updates, and we have to have a release right away for that so that customers can take advantage of the new versions.
Gotcha.
But, if we have something big and we need to release it right away, we can set that release date, do some quick testing, and then release it, almost immediately. And so that's pretty awesome to have that kind of flexibility. And it's the same thing with the mobile tooling because we are delivering tools to, to VS Code for Lightning Web components, and they have releases every week. We can just drop into one of those weekly releases and get the features out, instantly. And that's awesome to be able to do.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the SDKs themselves. Like, is it mobile SDK, or is it more accurate to say that you are actually managing multiple SDKs right now?
For the SDKs themselves, I manage the mobile SDK. And then outside of the SDK, I'm really focused on the developer experience for building for mobile in general. And so that could be, if you're doing Lightning Web components and how you make sure that they work well on mobile. But if you're actually building standalone mobile apps, I focus on that with the mobile SDK.
Got it. Now, I used to do this bit on stage. I would get up and I'm like, I am going to build an iOS application that will log into Salesforce, access a list of accounts, and be able to click through and view a detail. And I'm doing it live here on stage. I'm going to do it within 5 minutes. And the reason I could do that in 5 minutes was because the SDK was doing 3/4 of the work for me. Is that core still kind of what the SDK is kind of providing out of the box when it comes to like login, API access, record detail, et cetera?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. With Salesforce Mobile SDK, that's one of the huge benefits of it is you get to focus on, what your UI is going to look like, what your flow is going to look like. And we handle
Mm-hmm.
getting you quick access to the Salesforce platform and to the accounts and to the information. And we also handle, doing that in an offline way where you can easily sync your records back and forth, work offline, and when you're back online syncing. And we take care of all of that for you. So you don't have to worry about the authentication or the offline syncing.
Mm-hmm.
We provide the APIs to make that easy. And you get to focus on what you want the app to look like and do.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit more about the offline syncing, because my history with that is that it's always been something that's more complicated than it sounds. Like people kind of make it seem like it's just, well, you're offline, things just work, you're online, things just work. But how do you resolve things like, a record that changes on the server when the client is being manipulated offline?
Right. Yeah. So, what we have with the mobile SDK is we have mobile sync and smart store. And so when you are, you use the APIs to bring down the data that you want to use offline, and that's
Mm-hmm.
stored in our smart store. And so when the end user is using the application offline, they're actually accessing all that information in the local store on the device. And then what we do is when we sync back using mobile sync, we're checking what's changed on the server and what the client has, and we're resolving those conflicts for you. We're only looking at things that have changed, so we can do a quick sync just by looking at the changes and only syncing the changes or what we need to change. So even if you're bringing down, thousands of records, but you've only changed like 10, we're only making those types of changes. And so we're handling all of that for you with our mobile sync.
Got it. And does the human ever have to get involved to be like, no, I need this field to say this instead?
The end user doesn't have to worry about that. As the developer, you have a lot of control and to specify how you want to handle merge conflicts and what would happen there. And you can control that, but your end users won't have to worry about that.
Got it. Now, what different platforms is the SDK out for?
Yeah, so the SDK, our goal is to be as flexible as possible. So if you're looking to do native development, we have native for iOS, native for Android. If you're looking to do more of a hybrid, we have hybrid with Cordova. And then we also have React Native. So if you want, some of those native capabilities, but you only want to build the app one time, you can do that with our React Native version of the mobile SDK.
Got it. Well, let's dig into a couple of those. You just had a big update for some neat stuff that just was released, I believe, in iOS, especially for iPad. Like, how does handling multiple windows work with the SDK?
Yeah, sure. So what we did was we updated our frameworks to be able to support multiple windows. And when you are building applications, you can have the same application running side by side so that if you have multitaskers and you want to view your contact list, in one window, and you can easily just drag that one of those contacts over and it creates a new window in iPad so you can view the details. And what our SDK does is it handles the login session for you so that, once you're logged into one window, you're logged into the other window automatically. And when you log out, the same thing. And so we handle that for you so you don't have to worry about how to handle that. And then we provide some auth helper classes to be able to handle the login flow, and you can kind of contribute how the scenes would handle, how one scene behaves and how the other scene behaves. But for the most part, the SDK takes care of it for you. You just need to use the APIs and the SDK takes care of it. And we also updated our samples. So we have the mobile sync Swift Explorer sample. And if you use that, it already has the multiple windows, and then you can just, copy the code out that you want, or you can modify that sample just to, be the UI that you want with all of that technology already working.
Got it. And you'd mentioned like kind of working with some data side by side. Maybe you want to see like contacts in one window, so accounts in other windows. Well, what are some like interesting use cases that you've seen for this?
Yeah, I mean, the most, for the interesting, most often it's people that want to jump back and forth. So I've seen copy and paste. Like if you are updating information rather than exiting out of a record and going into another record, to then copy and paste and going back and forth. You can have your two screens side by side and being able to copy information from one to the other. That's a huge use case that people have wanted. But just even as you're looking for info, just having the list on one side and the details on the other, similar to what you may do with like a master detail if you were on desktop.
Right.
That's been like another popular use case that people want to do. But it's really about the multitasking effort of it, and the options are endless.
Nice. And what improvements do we see for landscape and portrait modes?
Yeah. So, with the mobile SDK, we're always like listening to customer feedback. And we heard that, for landscape, sometimes on the login screen or in certain areas, their app would get stuck in portrait mode. So we really took a concerted effort to look at all the different ways that you would use the app and made sure that if you switched from landscape to portrait and back, that it never got stuck in one position. And we released that update in our 9.0 release of the mobile SDK. And customers have already been using it, and they've been pretty happy because now, whether you're landscape or portrait, in the login screen or in any of the screens, and you go back and forth, it just switches seamlessly.
Gotcha. Nice. Now, the SDK you were mentioning also supports hybrid apps with Cordova, but kind of break that down for somebody who maybe hasn't really seen those nouns before. What kind of application are we building there?
Right. So if you're building an application where you're looking to build only one app, you're not looking to build a native app for iOS and then a separate app for Android. A lot of our customers go native, where they can bring a huge mixture of web technologies and then have some native plugins that go into that. And so with Cordova, you have plugins where you can access, camera and bring that up. Even though the majority of your application may be a web application in the app, you can still access, the camera to take pictures, or you can get the GPS information, and you can also have the app continue to work offline. You may not have all the specific details of native with like the navigation menus or things like that, but you get 80% of the look that customers are looking for, and you only have to build the app one time.
Okay, so then Cordova is providing this like native shell to it, and so as a developer, I don't have to worry about things like kind of the same list we were just talking about, like how to access, how to code the parts that are going to be authenticating against Salesforce or calling the APIs or accessing the camera. Mostly just kind of bringing the HTML in order to build out the user interface itself.
That's correct. One nice thing about the SDK is, regardless of whether you're using our hybrid SDK or the native SDKs or the React Native SDK, is that things like the auth access to Salesforce and the offline syncing, those span across all the different SDKs. And so you still focus on, the web UI you want to bring in with hybrid Cordova and using the Cordova plugins to, access specific device capabilities. But, your access to Salesforce is still there, just like if you were to use any of the other SDKs.
Got it. It does have to be web technology that's on the device, though, right? I can't just like point it to a remote URL or an existing website.
Right. It is web technology that's on the device.
Got it. Okay. Tell me a little bit more about React Native. Like, how is that different from what we were just talking about?
Yeah, with React Native, one of the nice things about React Native and some of these other technologies similar is that you get a lot more of the native feel from an end user perspective, but you're still only building the application one time. It's using JavaScript and metadata for actually building the application. And, actually with the mobile SDK, we also updated our React Native to also support TypeScript. So, right now you can build with TypeScript, or you can build with JavaScript. And when it goes to the device, it's actually using the native UI components on the device so that the end users get, a better performing mobile application. And they're also getting a real looking native experience that they would expect if you were to build a native iOS or a native Android application for them.
Got it. So if I have kind of my roll your own web technologies, I can kind of bring that, but I can also, but it sounds like React gives me a little bit more ammo, I guess. Like it feels like it's maybe a little bit more robust if I don't have something else to start with.
Right. Yeah. We find that more and more companies are doing this because it's the best of both worlds. You want cross-platform, but you want the end user to feel like they're using a true native app. And you get a lot more of that with React Native. Of course, with Mobile SDK, we find that a lot of our customers still want to go that next level up with native, with our iOS SDK or the native for Android SDK, because they have the developer resources and they want to provide like a true native experience. But for the customers that maybe, have a lot more of the JavaScript or TypeScript developer skills mostly, and they only want to build one app, the cross-platform with React Native is definitely a good place to start.
Gotcha. And are there any hiccups cross-platform, or is it really just sort of a one and done?
There are hiccups. There are certain things, if you're looking to take advantage of some of the newer capabilities from iOS or Android, that may not be yet available in React Native. And so you may have to wait for it, or you may have to build it in yourself. So that's one of the drawbacks. Also, even though for performance, it brings you closer to native, true native is always going to be, more performant than even a React Native. So there's going to still be a little bit of difference there. It just brings you so much closer to that experience.
Got it. All right. Well, let's shift topics and talk a little bit more about Lightning Web Components themselves. Speaking of web technologies, we can bring to bear. First, like even before we're thinking about like the tooling and some of the things you're building with Visual Studio Code, are there just sort of considerations that maybe somebody who's just had a lifetime of building Lightning Web Components for desktop, and then suddenly they just realize their stuff has to work in mobile? Like, are there things you wish that they had top of mind when they start building out these components?
Yeah, definitely. As a developer, when you're looking to build a Lightning Web component, you definitely want to think of mobile from the very beginning. You don't want it to be an afterthought. Some of the things that we've seen, as you're building it, our Lightning Web components are responsive and they will adjust to screen size. But because developers get a lot of control, they can make an amazing application, but they can also create applications that provide a poor experience for mobile. And this is making sure you're using mobile-friendly components, and your CSS has mobile in mind. Like your font isn't too small where you're not going to be able to read it on a small phone screen. Do you really want to be able to think about that? Even things from, is it a touch screen versus using a mouse? We provide guidelines in our documentation. We provide validators in VS Code to really help developers think about that stuff or like see that stuff, and we provide warnings there even if you haven't thought about it already.
So if I'm mostly just using base components and sticking within the normal swim lanes, it doesn't sound like there's much I need to worry about. The framework really kind of covers it by itself. But the more custom I'm going, the more likely I'm going to get into dangerous waters.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And even some of our base components for Salesforce, some of the early ones that we created, a few of them are tagged as, when you look at the base component list, they'll tell you whether they're mobile friendly or not. And there are a few that aren't great for mobile because they were really meant for a larger screen for desktop and for using a mouse with. And we've added validators in VS Code to let you know when you've hit one of those very few base components.
I just got to ask, just to be slightly mischievous, how does our friend the data table fare?
That's a good question. The data table is definitely on the not for mobile list, but
gotcha.
Yeah. So when you try and add the data table, we will at least give you a warning to say, hey, this may not work so well on mobile devices. But the base component team is looking at creating a new data table that would be mobile friendly, and so we have been working with them on that.
Got it. Nice. Okay, so let's walk through the Visual Studio Code experience itself. Like, what's my starting point? Am I installing like the SDK itself, or is it this is a new VS Code extension, I'm assuming?
Right. Yep. We have a new extension it ties in well with the Salesforce extension for Lightning Web Components. Okay. And what it does is it installs the ability to see previews, not just on desktop, but also on iOS and Android. And it helps you get that all set up. So once you install that new extension, when you right-click on your component to preview, before you would see just preview on desktop, and now you'll see preview on desktop, preview on iOS, preview on Android. And then when you select those, the simulator launches, and you see your Lightning Web component in the iOS simulator or the Android emulator.
Got it. And correct me if I'm wrong, you can do that offline through local server?
Yes, that's right. Yes, you can do it all locally. You don't have to, publish to an org or anything.
Got it. And then anything in addition to those validators, or maybe just a follow-up questions, what sort of things are those validators looking for to kind of keep that old desktop developer safely in line?
Yeah, great question. So the validators that we've added so far, base component validation,
Uh-huh.
CSS validation, and then we've also added some linting rules for offline ability. With mobile apps, you definitely want to make sure that the apps that you're building will either, if it's completely web-based, they'll maybe once you're offline, it will kind of go offline gracefully and not just error out. But if you're building, it with data and at-wires, that, we have some linting rules to say, hey, this at-wire you're using is not great for offline. You can choose a different one and we'll provide help with that.
Gotcha. And I think that actually kind of gets to a follow-up question, because when you're saying offline, so that goes back to like Smart Store, right? Like, is there any tooling in Visual Studio Code to kind of seed the data that's being cached or versus the server or anything like that?
Not yet, but on mobile, we are working with something called the Lightning SDK, and that will provide a lot more ability to bring those Lightning components and use them offline. So that's currently available for a few pilot customers, but we are working to bring that into our mobile SDK apps and make that more available to all of our developers in the future.
Well, talking about things that are in pilot, is there anything on the roadmap that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, sure. For Lightning Web Components, one of the great things that, you can do is, really show off your web capabilities, both on desktop and mobile. And so one of the things that we will be highlighting later this year is bringing native capabilities into your Lightning Web Component. So, if you wanted to, be able to access the camera or access the photo gallery on the device and save those images back to your component, or if you want to be able to do geofencing, where if somebody enters, your office location, you want to tell them, hey, here are the office details, or here are the hours for your tech force or something like that. You'd be able to do that from a Lightning Web Component. So really bringing native capabilities to Lightning.
Nice. Very nice. And where can people learn more about this?
Yeah, the best place to go for anyone to learn is the Mobile Development Center on developer.salesforce.com. There we have everything mobile developer related, whether it's the mobile tools or it's mobile SDK if you're building standalone apps. We have our latest blogs, we have our videos, and links to the emulator builds that we provide.
And that's our show. However, before we go, I did ask after Sue's favorite non-technical hobby, and like many of my guests, she couldn't pick just one.
Well, I'm going to list two because it's really difficult for me to list one. For me at home, if I'm just really stressed about something, I love to play the piano. And so I'll play the piano. I'm so focused on learning a new song that it will just take my mind off of everything else. And It's just really a joy that I have. I'm not great, but I'm good enough to enjoy the music.
There you go.
And then, I grew up in Florida, so I miss the warm water being out here in the Bay Area. So whenever I can, I will go find a heated pool or a warm water that I can swim in and just feel like I'm on vacation, even if it's just for 30 minutes. I love being in the water.
Nice. Yeah, we gave up our gym membership over the pandemic, but pretty much the sole reason I was trying to hang on to it is because it's a swimming pool that I can actually drive to. So I feel
Yeah. I found one locally where it's an outdoor pool, which meant it was safe for the pandemic and the water is warm, and it was really nice to get away, and especially during the pandemic where we were all locked inside, to go outside and feel like you're on vacation just for a little bit was great.
I want to thank Sue for the great conversation and information. And as always, I want to thank you for listening. Now, if you want to learn more about this show, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can hear old episodes, see the show notes, and have links to your favorite podcast service. Thanks again, everybody. I'll talk to you next week.